Welcome to another gripping story that will have you questioning trust, love, and redemption. Today, we dive into a tale of a seemingly perfect marriage shattered in a single night. If you've ever wondered what you would do in the face of betrayal, stay tuned. This one's for you. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that inspire and challenge. What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world confessed to the ultimate betrayal? Would you fight for love or walk away to protect your dignity? This is Mark's story, and it will leave you speechless. Mark, 32M, had built his life around Kate, 30F. Their 9-year relationship, 4 of which were spent in marriage, was everything he had dreamed of, loving, supportive, and filled with an unbreakable trust. Conversations about cheating had been clear-cut. It was a deal-breaker for Mark. Still, he never imagined it would ever become more than theoretical. The weekend started ordinarily enough. Kate had planned a visit to her parents, which was common. They'd had a minor disagreement the night before over keeping the house tidy, but nothing that couldn't be brushed off. As Mark waved her off on Friday morning, he couldn't shake a faint feeling of unease, but dismissed it as residual tension from their argument. That night, he texted her to say, "Hope you're having a nice time." Her reply was brief. All good. Just tired. He trusted her implicitly and went to bed without a second thought. The following morning, a missed call from Kate at 4 a.m. sent a jolt of worry through Mark. He stared at the screen, confusion and concern swirling in his chest. Why would she call at that hour? He immediately tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. Repeated attempts yielded no response, and as hours dragged on, Mark's unease turned to dread. Finally, a curt message arrived. "I'm fine. Driving back soon?" Mark waited anxiously, pacing the living room, his mind racing with scenarios. When Kate walked through the door that afternoon, his heart sank. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot, and her face pale. She looked like she had been through a war, one she had clearly lost. Her usual vibrant presence had dimmed to a hollow shell. Avoiding his touch and his eyes, Kate collapsed onto the couch. The air between them was thick with tension. Mark crouched in front of her, his voice gentle but firm. "Kate, what's going on? You're scaring me." Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. Mark sat beside her, his arm hovering uncertainly over her shoulders. Finally, through choking sobs, the words spilled out. "I slept with someone last night." The room seemed to tilt. Mark felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. He stared at her, uncomprehending. What are you saying?" he managed to whisper. Kate's face crumpled. "I was drunk, but I knew what I was doing. It was a mistake, an awful, terrible mistake. I don't even recognize myself right now." Mark's mind fractured. A roaring sound filled his ears as the gravity of her confession settled in. Without a word, he stood, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. He drove aimlessly, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, tears blurring his vision. Eventually, he found himself at a quiet park. There, amidst the stillness, he tried to piece together his thoughts, his trust, his marriage. How could everything he knew about his life change in an instant? After an hour of walking, Mark returned home, his resolve hardening. Kate was curled on the living room floor, her cries echoing through the silent house. He didn't say a word as he went to the bedroom, grabbed 2 suitcases, and began packing her belongings. Each item he placed in the suitcase felt like a nail in the coffin of their marriage. "Mark, please," Kate begged, her voice hoarse. She crawled toward him, clutching his legs. "Don't do this. Let me explain. Please." Mark's jaw tightened as he gently, but firmly, detached her hands. "Your best friend is coming to pick you up. You'll stay with her tonight. I need time." By the time he returned from a brief drive to clear his head, the suitcases and Kate were gone. The silence of the house was deafening, and for the first time, it truly hit him. His life would never be the same again. Monday brought clarity and a cold determination. Mark's phone had been inundated with calls and messages from Kate and her friends, all of which he ignored. Instead, He called a divorce lawyer, moved his money into separate accounts, and blocked Kate and her circle on every platform. Autopilot had taken over. There was no space for emotion. Mark moved through his days like a ghost, his mind stuck on replaying Kate's confession and the moments that followed. He kept waiting for the anger, the sadness, or even the heartbreak to fully surface, but all he felt was an aching void, a hollow where his love and trust used to be. The ache of betrayal gnawed at him, though he refused to acknowledge it. Each passing hour without Kate in the house felt surreal, like he was living someone else's life. Memories of their wedding day, vacations, and quiet evenings together flashed through his mind, clashing painfully with the image of her broken confession. Kate had left a note on his doorstep, begging him to meet her. Mark wasn't sure if he could. He demanded an email detailing everything about that night and warned her that any omission would obliterate any hope of reconciliation. By Monday evening, the email had arrived, but Mark couldn't bring himself to open it. The unopened email sat like a ticking bomb in his inbox, daring him to confront the full weight of her betrayal. On Tuesday, Kate's best friend showed up at his house, her expression a storm of anger and concern. She banged on the door until Mark opened it. "You owe her a chance to explain," she shouted, her eyes blazing. Mark stared at her unmoved. "I don't owe anyone anything," he replied coolly. "Talk to Kate if you want answers." With that, he closed the door in her face. Still, the numbness persisted. He functioned, but the vibrant colors of his life had dulled to grayscale. At work, he completed tasks mechanically. At the gym, he pushed himself to exhaustion, as though physical pain could drown the emotional void. Nights were the worst, haunted by what-ifs and the ghost of the love he once shared with Kate. Wednesday arrived, and with it, Mark's internal battle. His mind had been consumed by the haunting image of Kate's tear-streaked face, the echo of her sobs still ringing in his ears. Could he really sit down with her and hear her out? Could he stomach the sound of her voice, once so familiar, now laced with shame? The meeting was set for noon at a quiet cafe, a neutral spot where their past would remain hidden beneath the clinking of coffee cups and murmurs of other patrons. Mark arrived early, heart pounding as he chose a corner table, trying to steady his breath. He wasn't sure what he expected from this meeting, but he knew it was likely the last conversation he would ever have with Kate. When she walked in, time seemed to slow. Kate's appearance was almost unrecognizable. Her once glowing skin was now drawn and pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she hadn't slept for days. Her hands shook as she clutched her purse to her chest. She looked fragile, broken, like a shadow of the woman Mark had once loved with all his heart. "Mark," she whispered his name, but the sound was barely audible above the low hum of the cafe. Mark's expression remained neutral, though inside, a storm raged. The weight of the moment settled between them like a wall neither could climb. He gestured to the chair opposite him, and Kate hesitated before slowly sitting down. The air was thick with the tension of everything unsaid. Mark's eyes locked onto hers, but there was no warmth left, just cold, calculated resolve. He had to know what she had to say. He needed to hear it, even if it tore him apart. "I don't even know where to start," Kate began, her voice cracking as she spoke. Her hands trembled on the table, but she clenched them into fists, as if trying to hold herself together. "Mark, I don't know why I did it. I wasn't myself. I was drunk and I didn't think it would hurt you." Mark's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists under the table. He wanted to lash out, to scream, but instead, he remained still, a mask of icy composure. Kate's words were nothing but empty excuses, the same ones he had been hearing in his mind for days. He knew she had tried to justify it to herself, but the damage was done. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was at a party with some friends. I didn't plan on it. I wasn't thinking, and I drank more than I should have. And then it just happened. I don't even remember all the details. I just know it was a mistake, and I hate myself for it. I never wanted to hurt you, Mark. You didn't deserve this. I don't deserve you, I know that." Her eyes filled with tears, But Mark didn't flinch. His heart was a battleground, torn between the love he had for her and the cold, jagged wound her betrayal had carved into his chest. Every word she spoke felt like a blade, slicing through what remained of his trust. It was as if he were hearing her, but not really listening, the weight of her confession too heavy to bear. "I've been thinking about everything," Kate said, her voice cracking. "The way you've been since I told you. I can see the hurt in your eyes. I've destroyed us, I know. But I love you, Mark. Please, I'm begging you, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything to make this right. Just please don't give up on us. I don't want to lose you." Her desperation was palpable, but Mark remained silent, his eyes cold, unreadable. He had heard this plea 1,000 times in his mind, but hearing it from her felt different. His mind raced back to the moments when Kate had been his whole world, back to their wedding day when they had vowed to love each other for better or worse. But now those promises felt like lies. The depth of her betrayal had shattered them beyond repair. Mark's throat tightened, and the words finally came, but they were laced with quiet fury. "No, Kate. No, I don't think you understand. You didn't just make a mistake. You didn't just have a moment of weakness. You broke something. You broke me. You broke everything we built, everything I trusted. You went behind my back, and you gave yourself to someone else. That's not something you can just undo with apologies and promises." His voice grew quieter, but no less intense. "I loved you, Kate. I trusted you. And you destroyed that. I don't even know who you are anymore. How can I ever look at you the same way? How can I trust you again?" Kate's tears flowed freely now, but Mark could see that her remorse, though genuine, wasn't enough. It could never be enough. She had broken the foundation of their relationship, and he couldn't rebuild it, no matter how hard he tried. "I'm sorry, Mark," Kate sobbed. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I'll do anything." The desperation in her voice only served to harden Mark's heart. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to cut ties, to leave her in the past where she belonged. But he couldn't move. He couldn't look away from the woman who had once meant everything to him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of them. Mark finally stood, his legs stiff, and turned toward the door. Kate's voice called after him, broken and pleading, but he didn't turn back. The door swung shut behind him, leaving the echoes of their shattered love lingering in the air. After the confrontation at the cafe, Mark felt like he was walking through life in a haze. The emotional toll of the past few days had left him drained, as if every step forward was a struggle against an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. Kate's words, her pleading eyes, and her desperate promise to fix everything haunted him. But there was no fixing this. What she had done was irreparable, and the pieces of their relationship had scattered beyond his reach. Back at home, the silence felt suffocating. Mark had moved mechanically through the day, eating only when his body demanded it, sleeping fitfully, and staring into space at times when the pain threatened to overwhelm him. His mind replayed the worst moments in excruciating detail, Kate's tearful apology, her quivering voice begging for another chance, the sound of her heartbroken pleas echoing in his ears. But none of it mattered. He couldn't forget what she had done. He couldn't erase the image of her in someone else's arms. He opened her email one last time, though he wasn't sure why. The words were there, black and white. Her confession, her remorse. No excuses. No justifications. Just the raw admission of her betrayal. And even now, as he read them, he couldn't decide if they made it worse or if they gave him the clarity he so desperately needed. Kate's message was as simple as it was agonizing. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I never meant to hurt you. I was weak. I was foolish. I made the biggest mistake of my life." But how could she expect him to forgive her? How could she expect him to just wipe away the image of her in someone else's arms? He closed the email and stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, each one marking the inexorable passage of time. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to Kate, to a life he no longer recognized, and the other leading to an uncertain future, one where he would have to learn how to live without the woman he had once loved so deeply. Mark knew the decision was his to make, but he was terrified. Terrified of the loneliness he would face if he walked away. Terrified of the emptiness that would settle into the space she left behind. But there was something even worse, something more suffocating than loneliness, the thought of living a life of betrayal, of never being able to trust her again. That thought filled him with a darkness he couldn't escape. By Friday, Mark had made up his mind. He would meet Kate one last time. He would finally put an end to the cycle of heartache, of what-ifs and could-haves. He called her and asked her to meet him at their favorite park, the one where they had shared their first kiss, the place where their love had seemed so pure, so infinite. It had been their sanctuary until now. He arrived early, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. The park was quiet, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. The leaves rustled as they fell from the trees, swirling in the breeze like memories tumbling through his mind. He walked to the old oak tree, the one where they had promised to always find each other, no matter what. It seemed almost fitting that it was here, at this place of their first love, that he would deliver the final blow to their marriage. Mark stood in silence, waiting. His thoughts were jumbled, his heart pulled in opposite directions, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of her betrayal. He couldn't keep pretending that they could fix something that was beyond repair. When Kate arrived, she looked even more broken than she had at the cafe. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from a sleepless night of crying. She looked as though she had aged years in the past week, the weight of her guilt visibly etched on her features. She approached slowly, her footsteps faltering, like she knew this was the moment that would change everything. "Mark." Her voice was hoarse, choked with emotion. She reached for him, but he stepped back, the distance between them growing with every passing second. He didn't need to hear more apologies. He didn't need to hear her plea for forgiveness. He had already heard enough. What had been done couldn't be undone. Without a word, Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to her without looking her in the eye. Kate's trembling hands shook as she took the letter, her breath catching in her throat. She looked up at him, her expression one of disbelief. She had begged him for a chance to explain, for a chance to make it right. But here, in his hand, was the final answer. "Read it," he said softly, his voice devoid of the anger that had once threatened to overtake him. There was no room for anger anymore, only the crushing reality of his decision. Kate's hands shook as she opened the envelope, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the words, each sentence tearing into her soul. Mark had written about the years they had shared, the love, the laughter, the memories that had once defined their life together. But there, at the end, were the words that sealed their fate. "I can't forgive you, Kate. Not now. Not ever. I've given you all the chances I could, but I can't live in the shadow of your betrayal. I'm filing for divorce. I hope you find peace, but I can't walk this path with you anymore." The letter slipped from her hands, her tears falling freely as she crumpled to the ground in front of him. "No," she whispered, as if denying it would somehow change the truth. "Please, please don't do this. I love you. I'll change. I'll make it right. I swear I will." Mark's heart cracked, but he stood firm. "You had your chance, Kate. You broke me. I can't fix that. And I can't live like this anymore." For a long moment, they both stood in silence. The wind carried the sound of her sobs through the park, but Mark didn't move. He couldn't move. He had done what he needed to do, and now it was over. Kate's voice was barely a whisper as she stood up, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice broken. "I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, his eyes distant. "I know, but it's too late." As Kate walked away, Mark stood beneath the oak tree, feeling a strange peace settle over him. It wasn't the peace of closure or resolution, but the peace of knowing that he had made the hardest choice of his life. It was the peace of reclaiming his future, of freeing himself from the shackles of betrayal. And though the path ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: he would never again allow himself to be defined by the past. What would you do if you were in Mark's shoes? Could you forgive the ultimate betrayal, or would you walk away for good? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to never miss a new story that challenges, inspires, and makes us think. Stay tuned for more gripping tales that delve into the complexities of trust, love, and redemption.